Hi, welcome back to part 2 of the Tic-Tac-Toe C++ tutorial. So, in the last tutorial, we created our widget and displayed it to the user. But, well, you might be asking, where's the grid, right? So, let's go ahead and create it, shall we? So the first thing we gotta do is go to our widget class, okay? So, we have multiple options to create our grid, right? We could create 9 buttons here, 9 variables of buttons that will display the grid, but this won't be effective, right? So in order to create our widget cell, we gotta create a separate widget class which will be responsible for creating the cell, okay, how the cell will look like. So in other words, it will be dedicated for the widget, the grid cell. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's call it Tic-Tac-Toe cell widget. Nice. So it's created. Let's reload all and let's start scripting, shall we? Okay, so the first thing we need is a button and a text block, right? Because the button will be responsible for the user. When the user clicks, it's responsible for actually displaying the user symbol, right? Which is the X. And the X is defined by a text block. So let's go ahead and forward declare u button and forward declare u text block. Public, or we'll actually do it on private. Um, u property meta equal bind widget u button, and let's call it button. Okay, let's create a text block. Let's actually copy paste this here. U text block symbol. Let's call it symbol because it represents the symbol, right? Okay, don't worry about the errors. It's just Visual Studio doing Visual Studio stuff. Don't worry about it. This displays X or O. Okay, now I'm not sure why this error is here, but never mind it. Let's go ahead and compile our code. Nice, it's linked successfully, so these errors are just visually. And now let's create a blueprint based on Tic-Tac-Toe cell widget. Let's call it Tic-Tac-Toe cell widget and let's go blueprint. Okay, so let's go ahead and insert a size box. Let's override the width and the height to 250, and let's set reside on screen so we can actually see how it looks like. Now let's add the button. Let's call it button, and let's add text block inside the button, and let's call it symbol. Let's give it some nice look maybe 2 outline or 3. Yeah, okay. And let's wrap it with a scale box actually. Scale box. Nice. Okay. Okay. I'm happy with it. Let's go back to button, style, and now we don't really need this background, right? We want it to be transparent. So let's go to normal and change the draw as to border. Okay, now it's transparent and it's only the border which is available. We can't see it now because it's zero margin. But let's change its color to black. And copy this and paste it to normal, to hovered and pressed. Great. Okay. Now let's go back to our widget and let's go back to our Tic-Tac-Toe widget actually and create a new function called void generate grid. This will be responsible to generate our cell widgets. Let's go ahead and create a definition and let's start scripting. So, how do we create our widget? As we said earlier, let's just delete this real quick. As we said earlier, our widget is 3 times 3 grid, right? So, we need 3 rows and 3 columns. And in order to do that, we need to generate and we need to create two for loops, nested for loop. Okay, so the first one will be responsible for the rows, and the second one will be responsible for the columns, right? So let's do it real quick. Actually, first we need to create a reference to our Tic-Tac-Toe cell widget in our Tic-Tac-Toe widget. Okay, so in order to do that, we just do the same thing we did in the game mode. Okay, we take this, or no, let's just type it. Okay, so to do that, we first need to forward declare the class u tic-tac-toe cell widget. Okay, then create a reference to it in here. So the subclass of u tic-tac-toe cell widget, right? Let's call it cell widget class, and let's give it a property of u property of edit defaults only, category equal UI. So this macro here allows us to access this cell widget class in our editor. Okay, so edit defaults only means we can only edit its defaults, nothing else. Okay, it's not readable or writable via blueprints. It's only available to be able to change its defaults. Okay, to give it a default value. And the reason we are doing this is because we need to give this class, okay, we need to give it this class here. Okay, so everything will make sense in just a bit. Okay, we also need an array, the array of type u tic-tac-toe cell widget. Okay, and let's call it cells. So this array here will use to store our cells, our dynamically created cells. Great. Let's go to our CPP file. Now we are ready to actually script this function. Okay. So first loop will be for int row equals 0, row smaller than 3, row plus plus. So this will loop from 0, 1, 2, okay, and create our rows. Inside of this loop, we need to create another for loop for the columns, right? So int col equals 0, col smaller than 3, col plus plus. Great. Now for row 0 and row column, for row 0 and column 0, we want to create a cell, right? For row 1 and column 1, we need to create a cell, and so on. So in order to do that, you Tic-Tac-Toe cell widget new cell is equal to create widget new Tic-Tac-Toe cell widget get word. What did you call it? Cell widget class? Yeah, cell widget class. Okay, so we are getting this error because we haven't included the header here of Tic-Tac-Toe cell. So let's do that. Great, the error is gone. Okay, so after we create our widget, which is called new cell, so the new cell holds this widget, this variable holds this widget, we need to check if the grid panel we have is valid. What did you call it? We called it grid, I guess. No. Tic-Tac-Toe grid, okay. Tic-Tac-Toe grid. If it's valid, we need to add this newly created widget to it, to the grid. Oh, we are getting the error here because we didn't include the grid panel header. Grid components grid panel.h. Now we can actually access the grid panel class. Okay, add child to grid. So it takes 3 parameters. It takes the content, the widget we want to add, which is new cell. It also takes the row and the column we want to add it to. So it's simply row column, right? So it's the integers defined in the loop. Okay, awesome. We need to also store it. Cells dot add new cell. We are adding this new cell to the array of cells because we need it later. Store the created cell in the array for later reference use. Okay, nice. So now let's go back to our game mode, or we could just actually do it from here. Let's go to protected. Okay, let's override the native construct function, which is basically the begin play for widgets. So virtual native construct, virtual void native construct override. And let's create a definition. Okay, now we call generate grid. Let's go ahead and compile. So now the begin play will generate this grid and it will display it in our widget. Let's see. Well, it didn't work. And that's because create widget called with a null class, right? So the reason is, remember how I told you here that this macro allows us to edit the defaults for the cell widget. Well, right now we didn't do that because I forgot to. So we got this error, but I'm glad that we got it so you can see what's actually happening. So how to fix that? We go into our Tic-Tac-Toe widget blueprint. Okay, we go into our graph, class defaults, and here on the left we get the cell widget class, which is none right now. We click on it and we set it to tic-tac-toe cell widget underscore BP. So it's basically, so this class is basically now this class, right? Let's compile this and ta-da, it worked. Okay, nice. But it doesn't look like a tic-tac-toe grid, so let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So the reason it doesn't look like it because our button doesn't have any margin. So if you set it to 1, as you can see, now it has it looks more like it. But usually tic-tac-toe grids don't have outside borders, right? And to get rid of that, you need to create a new function. We need to create a new function in our cell widget, and this function will be responsible to check the cell position in the grid, right? So, and based on that position, we will set the proper margin for the button. Okay, so let's create public access specifier. Let's create the function. It's called set button margin. Okay, and it takes two parameters, one for the row, one for the column. Okay, so what we need to do is to check the row and the column of our cell, okay, of this cell, and based on that we check if it's if the margin should be 0 or 1. So if the button is valid, let's go create a new margin variable, and let's give it a default value of 1. Okay, so now this is actually equal to this. Okay, 1 1 1 1. Let's go ahead and put this as 0. Okay, so if the column is equal to 0, it means it's the left column, right? Let me explain. So if the column is equal to 0, since this column is 0, this column is 1, this column is 2. If it's equal to 0, then it's the left one, right? So if it's equal to 0, margin this one dot left is equal to 0.0f. No margin on the left column. Well, else if column equal 2, which means it's on the right column, margin dot right is equal to is equal to 0.0f. Oh my god. Okay, cool. Now, if the row is equal to 0, it means it's the upper row, right? Because this row here is 0, this row here is 1, and this is 2. So if it's 0, it's the upper row. So margin dot top equal 0.0f. Oops. Else if row equal to 2, margin dot bottom equal 0.0f. Bottom row up top row. Okay, now next we need to actually apply the new style, the new margin to our cell. So we need to create a button style variable, call it the new style, equal button widget, include components button. Okay, new style equal button widget style. So the button style is, this new style is taking this existing button style as its value. Okay, so new style dot margin dot dot normal dot margin. So this basically means that normal, okay, when button appearance, when the button is not hovered or pressed, margin of it, the margin of the normal, is equal to margin simply. We need to do that for hovered and pressed too. Awesome. Okay, now we need to actually set the style of the button. Button set style new style, and that's about it. That's the function. Great. Now in our tic-tac-toe widget, remember how we defined this as public, so it means we can access it from other classes such as tic-tac-toe widget.cpp. So when you create this new cell, we need to also modify this new cell by calling the set button margin function row colon simply. Okay. Oops. Oh my god. Okay. So finger crossed this should work. Let's compile. And we get an error. Let's see. Okay, so this error means basically that we haven't included the dependency for slate buttons, for slate brush, in our build file. So let's go ahead and go to where is it? Source? Yeah, source tic-tac-toe tutorial, tic-tac-toe tutorial.build.cs. So let's go ahead and edit it. Let's go to private dependency model names and add two dependencies, one slate and the second it's called slate core. Okay, let's close that, recompile, and it should work. Yep, it's working. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our game, and it's working. See, now it looks more like a grid, right? Nice. We still have to take care of the text block real quick. Let's do that. let's create a new function, void set symbol text, and it takes parameter a string symbol text. Okay, let's if symbol, right? If it's valid, if it's available. So basically we check for everything before we actually start the code, start scripting, because if it's not valid and we try to access it, we might encounter some crashes and so on. So it's always safer to check before. Okay, so symbol set text. Oh, we have to include our header for text blocks. Components text block.h set text, and the text we want to set it as this simple text. However, we define it as an f string, and the set text is an f text. So in order to convert from f string from f text to string, we simply type f text to access the text properties, then from string, and the string we actually want to simple text, the text we actually want to convert, right? Okay, nice. Let's go back to our tic-tac-toe widget, new cell, set symbol text, and just leave it as empty. Let's go ahead, compile. And let's start, and it's empty. Okay, nice. So I'm trying to click here, but nothing is happening. That's because we haven't actually scripted our player move yet. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so remember in the first video how we created this boolean to check if it's the player turn or not. So it's time to use it. So if it's the player turn, player is player turn. Okay, we need to make another check, which is remember here how we created this 2D array. Okay, so it's time to use it now. So if the array at this specific row and this specific column, so the first one is representing the rows and the second one is representing the columns. If this specific cell is equal to 0, okay, and by equal to 0 we mean it's empty, it's not yet not chosen by X or O, okay, we set this grid and set this row in the grid to be equal to 1. So run represents the player, right? Okay. And -1 will be representing our AI. So next we need to update the text inside the cell. And in order to do that, we need to create a function inside our tic-tac-toe widget. Okay, and then call it here. So let's go ahead and tic-tac-toe widget. Let's call it on cell clicked. Okay, and it will take two parameters, actually three parameters, and row and column and a string symbol. Okay, let's define it here real quick. So first we need to check we need to check if the cell chosen is actually a valid one, if it exists inside our uh, where is it? Inside our cells array, right? So int cell index is equal to row times 3 plus column. If cells dot is valid index cell index, oops, cell index, um, cells cell index. So we are accessing this uh, this cell from the array at this index. Okay, set cell, oops, set cell symbol, or what did you call it? What was it called? Set cell, set symbol text, right? Yeah, symbol. So let's go back to our game mode and call this function on cell clicked, row, colon, and the symbol is X because the player is represented by X. Okay, great. Then we call switch turn because it's not our turn anymore. So now let's go and compile this real quick. And if we click now, nothing happens. And that is because we haven't actually binded anything to our button here, right? So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Let's create a U function and let's void on button clicked. Let's call it on button clicked. Okay, quick actions, define it, and so what happens when we click our button? So whenever we click our button, we need to call this function, right? Because the player moved. So in order to access our game mode from our cell widget, we need to create a new C++ class, which is an interface class, right? Because interface is a clean way to communicate between classes. So let's go ahead and create one real quick. And if we scroll to the very end, we see Unreal interface. Let's call it game mode interface. Great, our interface is created. We don't actually need a C++ class file for it. We just need the header. Okay, let's go ahead and create our function in the interface, which will actually be uh, a function to return our game mode, to return an instance of our game mode. So let's go ahead and create it real quick. Virtual a tic-tac-toe game mode. Okay, and let's call it get game mode instance. Okay, equal 0. And let's forward declare the game mode here. Tic-tac-toe game mode. Okay, nice. Now let's go back to our game mode header because this header will include the game mode interface. So let's go ahead and include game mode interface. Let's add it here, public I game mode interface. Great, so now our game mode implements this interface, and let's override the function we just did, virtual get virtual a tic-tac-toe game mode get game mode instance, and let's return this. So return this means it's returning this class, right? A copy of it, an instance of it. Now let's go back to our widget here. So to be able to access the game interface, the game mode interface, we need to include some files first. And these files are include game framework, game mode base, include tic-tac-toe game mode, and include game mode interface. Great. Now in our button click function, we need to access this game mode interface, okay, and return our game mode instance so we can get a copy of it in here and access it, right? So if get word a game mode base, let's call it game mode, is equal to get word get auth. Where is it? Game mode. Okay, so this is actually returning the current game mode instance. Okay, and if game mode is valid and this same game mode implements get class implements the interface, the game mode interface. So implements interface u game mode interface static class. So if it implements this interface, I game mode interface game mode interface. So we just created a variable of type game mode interface, okay, is equal to cast I game mode interface. Oh my god, I game mode interface, and the object we are casting from is game mode. Okay, so if the cast was successful and the game mode interface is valid, now we can actually access it. A game mode interface get game mode ref instance. We are getting an instance of our game mode. Now we can access it. Player move row. Okay, we don't actually have a row and cell yet, so let's go ahead and change that. Let's create int row cell row int cell column. Okay, so cell row cell column, and then in order to set the values for this cell row and cell column, we need to create a new, or no, we don't actually need to create a function. Oh yeah, let's just create a function quickly. Let's call it void set cell row, int row, void set cell colon, int new column. Okay. So cell colon equal new cell, row equal new row, set colon equal new column. Let's go to our here, new cell, set colon, colon, new cell, set row, row. Okay, let's actually put them first here. Great. So we created our function for button click, but we haven't actually binded this function to our button on click, right? So let's do that real quick. Let's override the native construct function. Native construct. Okay. Super native construct. If button is valid, button on clicked dot add dynamic, not just dynamic, this you. So this means the object that that contains the function that we want to bind it to. Okay. Tic-Tac-Toe widget cell widget on button. Now we call the function on button clicked. Great. Let's go ahead and compile our code. And we get an error. At 9 then if you the title right. Okay, so we have an error here. Oh, that's because we haven't actually saved this file. So let's go ahead and save it and try again. So we haven't saved this file, and therefore when we did the mistake first here, we typed this function name wrong. We didn't save the file after we changed it, after we fixed it. So it's still taking it as old function name, right? So we get another error. Interesting. Okay. I'm not sure why. Oh, okay. We forgot the end here. Okay. It's syntax error. Okay, cool. It's successfully compiled. So let's go ahead and try now. Press X. Nice. It's working, but of course we are abusing it because we cannot switch turns just now. So We will do that in the next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions. And see you next time.